You're listening to NES Chat, brought to you by NES Global Talent, helping technical personnel advance their career.
Hello and welcome back to NES Chat with your hosts Lauren and Lauren. In this second episode of our career advice series, we're providing you with some invaluable interview advice.
We're taking you through all the steps from the best ways to prepare for an interview to what questions you should be asking your interviewer.
As well as some interview do's and don'ts so you don't make common mistakes.
And we're not alone. To help us, we've brought in experts from both sides of the hiring process, recruiter and hiring manager.
We truly have a jam-packed episode for you, so without further ado, let's talk interview tips.
Interviews are an integral part of the recruitment process and are of paramount importance. Like most things in life, if you don't prepare well, you're less likely to succeed.
But it can sometimes be difficult to know where to start. Every company and every role is different. So we've asked one of our senior recruiters based in California and a member of the board to help us get to the bottom of the best way to prepare for an interview.
Hi, I'm Vicki Codd. I'm the Group Marketing Director of NES Global Talent and I look after all things brand for NES.
My name is Zach Blaylock. I'm a Senior Manager of the West Coast, office out of Southern California. I run the recruitment team and sales team out here focused on downstream operations within oil refineries and petrochemical plants. Been with the business about 3.5 years and looking to expand the West Coast operations.
Okay, so the first thing we wanted to ask you is how many interviews have you conducted throughout your career?
I would say probably in the hundreds now. I've been around quite a long time and done quite a few interviews in that time. And there have been all sorts of interviews from very basic CV reviews on the phone to really in-depth, quite long interviews involving tests and competency questions.
I would say into the hundreds. Just internal for my own staff, I've conducted probably about 30 interviews.
So it's safe to say you're quite experienced then?
Yes, ma'am. I like to think so.
So in that case, in your opinion, what's the first thing a candidate should do once they've been offered an interview?
I think it's important to thoroughly research the company that you're going for an interview with. You need to show that you have good knowledge on the company, that you've taken some time to look at their website and look at things like their core values, latest news, if they've won any awards. It's the worst thing in the world for an interviewer if you say, what do you know about our company? And the interviewee says nothing. So you've got to really do your research and make sure that you're clued up before you get there.
But beyond the company's own website, is there anywhere else a candidate could look for information?
A great tool that we use in this industry is LinkedIn. So I would look at the company on LinkedIn, look at the people that are on there, what types of positions they're in. You can definitely look at industry tools like oil and gas. Financial Journals is a great one. I typically look up the person that's interviewing me, and I'd recommend the candidates to do that to know a little bit about your interviewer before going in.
I think these days the best thing to do is actually just Google the company name, and then under the news section of Google, you'll see all the latest news stories about the company, and that can range from anything to their financial results to, like I say, awards they've won and other news articles, and it gives you a much more broader background than just the messages on their website.
So once a candidate has done enough research and they've got enough information about the company, what should their next step be?
I think the next step would be to prepare for the interview itself. So whilst you can never know the exact questions you're going to get asked, the initial interview would probably centre around your own CV and the core skills that you've listed. So practice some examples and responses that you would give if you were asked around what your core skills were, what your experience is. Give examples of teamwork. Things like that are always asked. So it's good to start thinking ahead and put some of those examples in place before you go in.
There's lots of different tools available online for interviewing, but I would suggest candidates just prepare themselves for basically any situation from, the typical interview questions like, tell me about your greatest strengths or your greatest weaknesses, all those standard interview questions. But I think the most important thing is to tell them about yourself, what you can bring to the table, what you can do for the employer that creates value for the company. Speak a bit about what you're passionate about and about your experiences that you've had that are relevant for this job that make you the best fit. So I just prepare all those items, not sounding too scripted, but basically practice. Know what you're going to say. Basically, no matter what that interviewer asks, you're prepared and ready to answer it.
Beyond the basic interview questions, Candidates will also be asked competency-based questions, and these are always centred on the role itself. Is it possible to prepare for these?
That comes down to really understanding what the job is. And the best way to do that is by really understanding that job description and the core competencies that are required for that job. And then coming into the interview prepared to speak to each one of those competencies. For one, your experience in performing that particular, whatever that job requirement is. They'll talk about your experience performing that, but then also be prepared to perform it. So some employers may even break out a particular software. Like if you're a project scheduler within the oil and gas industry, one of the top softwares is a Primavera P6 for scheduling. So perhaps then making sure that you're prepared to open up that software and run it. And I know that sounds kind of rudimentary, open up a software, but that in itself is actually, I've had that happen externally with candidates that were going into that position. The employer asked them to open up the software. They were unable to. So just making sure that you've actually got the competencies that are required in that position and being prepared to prove it in real life, even if they break out a computer and ask you to open up, a particular software or Excel and run a formula or review some data, just being ready to do that.
I think one thing to bear in mind when you're doing competency answers is you have to explain really clearly what the situation was, how you applied yourself and demonstrated that particular skill, and then what the outcome was. And it's important to break it down into those sort of sections when you're answering, because sometimes interviewers will score you on the way you've answered each section. So make sure you break it down and it's quite a structured answer.
Cool. So some candidates like to prepare notes to take into their interviews. Does it bother you if candidates bring notes in?
Yeah, for me, absolutely, because it just shows lack of preparedness. You don't want a robot, or you don't want to be robotic coming in and literally having a script from your mind. But what notes show me is they really don't know from, in their mind or in their heart what they're talking about. If you got to reference notes, then it's not truly ingrained in you. So if it's not truly ingrained in you, well, study the heck out of those notes. It is ingrained in you, but by the time you get to that interview. And there's an old saying that says, fake it until you make it. But I actually heard on a TED Talk that was a great modification of that saying, that was fake it until you become it. And that really resonated with me because, you fake it until you become it. You study, you prepare, you train, act like you are what you're going into to interview for, and eventually you will become that.
It doesn't bother me, no, because I think it shows they have prepared. And like I say, a lot of people have brought in examples of their work, which I think is also useful to see. So no, I think it just shows that you've done some research. Obviously, if you look down and refer to your notes all the way through the interview, then you're not making eye contact with the interviewer, which can be an issue. But if you want to just bring them with you and refer to them occasionally, I don't see that as a problem.
Okay, so what would you say impresses you the most about a candidate?
What impresses me most is body language. The way the person comes in, presents themselves, sits in a professional manner, upright, eye contact, openness, and preparedness really in their body language.
When they come for interview itself, I think it's important to turn up a few minutes early. You should never really turn up late for an interview. Do make notes, and if you want to bring them in or if you want to bring examples of your work, I think that's always quite impressive. Make sure you dress smartly and you look like you really have made an effort for the interview itself. And always give a smiley welcome and a firm handshake. I think that's always a good sign as well when you first enter a room.
Okay, so the candidates prepared a few answers to some questions. Maybe they've been practicing their stare into the mirror so they can look really confident. But what about the questions that they should ask an interviewer? Is it a good idea for a candidate to ask questions at an interview? And do you have any examples of good questions?
I think it's always a good idea to ask a few questions at the end. Again, it just shows that you've researched the company and you're interested in finding out more. But also it's your opportunity to find out whether the role and the company is suited to you, because it's not just all about the interviewer. The candidate has to be right for the role as well. So think about what you want to know from that company, what might be useful. I've had some very good questions, one of which I remember was, what's the biggest challenge do you think I will face if I take this role? Which I thought was really interesting and sort of turned the normal questioning on its head. But often people just ask things about working hours, and other such queries. But it's quite good to ask something a little bit more in depth if you can think of something like that.
I like when they ask, "What does a day look like in this position?" Or asking, what are the three critical items to be successful in this role? And just questions like specific. What do I need to do to be successful in this role? A true recipe for success. So if they ask for that, it shows me that, hey, this person wants to be successful. They want to know what to do, and they want to be, they're asking for tips to do a good job. So it shows that they care and that they're motivated by performance, which that's important.
Thanks, Vicki and Zach, for your interview preparation advice. Vicki and Zach will be back shortly with some all-important interview do's and don'ts.
But now, we're hitting the road to find out what our recruitment teams think about candidates taking notes into an interview.
Personally, I've never had an issue with it. I think it shows a level of preparedness, and anything that helps a candidate give the best representation of themselves is always a good thing from me.
I don't think so, because a candidate should know what they've done and what they've achieved. If they aren't suitable for the role, it will show, and they don't need their notes to demonstrate that.
No, I don't think you should take notes into an interview, purely because it's like you should prepare beforehand. You shouldn't have to show that you prepared for an interview.
Yes, I do. I think it can be quite helpful for them, just to, in case you get in a conversation, lose your trail of thought, it can always be a good go-to. I've always suggested in the past making notes on a job description as well, so it looks like you've analysed the role a little bit further, and you can kind of cut it up and dissect it and talk to them more specifically about that as well.
Yeah, I think it's acceptable for a candidate to take notes into an interview. Shows that they're prepared and they've actually done some research, even if the client doesn't ask them if they've done any research, they've got it there anyway.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly acceptable for a candidate to take notes into an interview. Anything that helps you prepare, feel comfortable with the interviewers, have a few checkpoints to check back on. It's all a good experience and conveys well to the interviewers.
So there you have it. It seems we have quite a mixed bag on whether you should bring notes into an interview or not.
Our advice would be to make notes during your research stage and bring prompts if you feel you need them, but do not read from them like a script.
Confidence is really important to our hiring managers and recruiters, so you do well to learn and rehearse your examples prior to your interview.
We're back now with Zack and Vicki to go through some key interview do's and don'ts. What can a candidate do to leave a good first impression?
I think it's important to be smiley, give a firm handshake, be friendly, and follow your interviewer's lead. Always make eye contact with the interviewer. Try not to interrupt them and answer their questions politely. I think first impressions are really important.
There's a number of things candidates can do to leave good first impressions, but some of the big do's for me are have a firm handshake, have good eye contact, do ask for a business card at the end of the interview if you haven't already been given one, do ask for what the next steps are, do send a follow-up email thanking the interviewer for their time and maybe reiterating, why you're a good fit for the job and that you're passionate to move forward to the next step.
Okay, have you got any advice for things you shouldn't do? Any don'ts?
I think some of the golden rules are don't be late for an interview, and if you are late for traffic reasons, then always give a call to the company and tell them you're going to be late and explain. Put your phone on silent. There's nothing worse than your phone ringing in the middle of an interview. And try and look approachable and friendly. Don't sit there with your arms crossed or sigh throughout the interview. Try and look like you really want to be there and you're keen to take up this opportunity.
I would say don't underdress for the interview. You can always be overdressed and it won't necessarily hurt you, but being underdressed can certainly hurt you. So don't be underdressed. A real big one for me, don't chew gum or don't have a mint in your mouth or candy or anything like that. Don't come in with anything, chewing on anything or a toothpick or anything at all. It looks very unprofessional. And don't leave anything on the table. If you've got questions and you haven't had them answered, or you don't know exactly what's required, or you don't know what those next steps are, don't leave that out. Ask those questions. Leave that interview knowing everything you want to know about that job. Don't leave any stone unturned. Ask the questions that you need to be answered, and definitely get everything you need.
I actually have a personal don't that we can add to that list. I would say don't hug the interviewer as a goodbye. I was on the receiving end of a hug, a very unexpected hug, I might add, and as someone who likes their personal space, it did not go down well. I think there was nothing but good intentions behind it, but I think we just stick to a handshake. I think that's probably the safer option.
That is a great one. I haven't experienced that, so that's an excellent one to add.
Lastly, we'd love to know, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you during an interview?
I did once have an interview where I set all the candidates a short written test to test their written skills, and everybody had 20 minutes to complete the task, and then we did a normal interview. I went in at the end of the 20 minutes for one candidate and told him his time was up and he had to finish. And he got quite annoyed and aggressive because he wanted more time. But I explained that all the candidates had to have the same amount of time to make it fair, so I wasn't able to extend his task. And at which point he got quite angry and threw a pen across the room at me. So I'd say one of the main pieces of advice I'd have is follow your interviewer's lead, always be polite, and don't get aggressive and throw things if it doesn't go your way.
I haven't had a whole lot of horror stories. It just goes back to being prepared. Like, make sure you're prepared. You understand what the job is. Don't just, if you're looking for interview practice, okay, great, but don't just interview for the sake of interviewing. Like, go after a job that you really want, that you're passionate about, that you're qualified for. Maybe even you're missing a few qualifications and you're trying to advance your career. There's nothing wrong with that, but understand what that job is before you go after it. Otherwise, you'll get into the interview and you'll just be super awkward.
That's all we've got time for. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Lauren. I appreciate both of your time this morning. Have a good day.
If you found this episode helpful, check out our CV Tips episode on SoundCloud or iTunes, or head over to our blog section on nesgt.com for more career advice.
So far in this series, we've looked at what goes into a CV and how to prepare for an interview. Next time, we're taking a closer look at formatting your CV.
Spoiler alert!
You don't need to be a graphic designer to make it look good. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to NES Chat, brought to you by NES Global Talent, International Workforce Solutions Specialist. If you enjoyed this, make sure you look out for the next episode.